The Pacers season is finally over. It is mercifully over after the Pacers limped to a 10-game losing streak to close the season. We'll break down the Pacers' last two games here today, what happened in those games, what the Pacers can learn from them, and then a little monologue for me on what went wrong for the team this year, how can they learn from it. At the end, we'll talk about the standings ramifications that happened this weekend on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News. And today, we are moving on, ladies and gentlemen. The Pacers season has come to an end. It's not quite off-season mode yet here on Locked On Pacers, but today we'll break down the Pacers' final two games of the season in Philadelphia and in Brooklyn. Two competitive losses, which is basically the best-case scenario for the Pacers down the stretch of the season. I want to talk a little bit about this Pacers season in general. I'll monologue on the 25-57 Indiana Pacers. And at the end, the standings. How did they shake out? What does it mean for the Pacers in the draft? What should Pacers fans be rooting for in the play-in tournament? And then as this week goes on, there's going to be a lot to talk about. Exit interviews are Monday for every Pacers player and coach. That will be something interesting to talk about, evaluating this team's season with various other Pacers personalities. That'll all come this weekend, and then we'll pivot into off-season mode really late this week and early next week. But let's talk about the Pacers' final two games. My favorite thing to do, actually talk about the basketball games that happen. I'm sure at this stage, most people want to move on from the season, but I want to talk about their last two games, damn it, because some interesting stuff did happen. So Pacers lose to the Philadelphia 76ers, 133-120, then lose to the Brooklyn Nets, 134-126. Those two scores really sum up a lot of this Pacers season, don't they? Giving up a metric F-ton of points and scoring a bunch on their own, but not being able to get it done in a close game, and a perfect way for the Pacers to end the season, really. And that kind of sums up this weekend too. When you look at the things that they did, a new guy debuted in Gabe York, and TJ McConnell started both times and kind of fit in a new lineup as the Pacers were experimenting. And they found a way to gel and score some points, but they couldn't stop anybody. They didn't have any enforcers. They didn't have any cohesive defensive schemes to keep guys out of the paint. Just a really rough defensive performance from the Pacers all weekend long. Philly, with Joel Embiid having a 40-20 game and letting James Harden get in the paint very often, scored 64 points in the paint. The Brooklyn Nets scored 74. Need I say more? You've seen the Pacers play this season. You know that's exactly the problems they've had all year long, and will be the subject of the next segment here as we talk about this miserable Pacers season. But on the trends and things to take away side from this weekend, TJ McConnell starting, I thought, was a very interesting move from the Pacers. Getting him on the floor with Tyrese Haliburton was certainly interesting. He himself, individually, I would say TJ McConnell played pretty well. Against Philly, he had his best game, obviously, since December. 4 for 8 from the field, 12.6 assists, had a nice controlling sort of style when he was out there. And then against the Brooklyn, he shot 15 times, 14 points, 5 assists, 4 steals, plus 7 for TJ McConnell in that game. He was in the game for much of the run, where the Pacers actually ended up tying this one in the late third quarter at 91. It looked like the Pacers were about to play spoiler to the whole Eastern Conference play-in tournament for a little bit, and a lot of that was thanks to TJ McConnell. So on the bright side, he actually did play pretty well. I think that's encouraging that he can play with the groups that he played with and still be able to be TJ McConnell and guide the Pacers to success. That said, maybe I'm overthinking this, but he played with Haliburton as a default of starting, and perhaps that's why the Pacers did this, to get a full view, or at least the most view that they possibly could, of McConnell plus Haliburton. And the stats are okay. They still have a good offensive rating together, and intuitively they can both get in the lane and do well. But this team's all about Haliburton for the long haul. And it feels like when they play together, in a way that I haven't felt with any other Pacer really, that you just can't feel Haliburton's impact as much when McConnell's in the game. And McConnell was doing good stuff on his own, but it makes Haliburton a little less impactful, and maybe that's not what the Pacers want to do going forward. Haliburton only shot 10 times against Philly, for example, and he played at 36 and a half minutes. And he had a wonderful game, 19 points, 9 assists. Maybe that's what the Pacers want in general, is him to have that level of impact at this stage, but it seems like he should be playing more as a guy who takes like 15 to 19 shots in a game. He took 14 against the Nets, for example, and you could feel his impact a little bit more in that game. Now, McConnell also played in that one, but 17 and 10 for Haliburton that second night. It just felt like his impact was not there. He wasn't doing a much, and then all of a sudden he would just have a big burst of like, wow, you can really feel Tyrese Haliburton taking over the game. So I have a little bit of concern about his fit with McConnell long term, but McConnell did play well this weekend, which inspires confidence that if he is with the Pacers next year, as their backup point guard. He can play well with a lot of the new guys on this team, and if needed with Halliburton for a few minutes. The numbers say, yeah, maybe it's okay. Something else that happened interesting this weekend, Oshae Brissett was awesome. Awesome. Best pacer scoring-wise over the course of the weekend. Only 20-point score against Philly with exactly 20. 3 for 5 from deep, 7 rebounds as well. And then against the Nets, he was unbelievable, instrumental in their comeback. He took 20 shots, but he had 28 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists. 48 points over the weekend for Oshae Brissett. He was wonderful, playing with two guards who could find him cutting and two of the Pacers' best passers playing together at the same time. Really ignited his impact as an off-ball guy, and he made the most of it, hitting huge shots against the Nets, hitting big shots against the Sixers. Again, the Pacers, like, despite these final scores, were in both of these games in a pretty meaningful way. You know, they were down, I think, 4 or 5 in the third quarter against Philly, made it really interesting after Philly built a double-digit first-half lead. And then against the Nets, they were, again, tied late in the third quarter and only down, I think, 3 early in the fourth quarter. You know, they did a good job of doing what they always do, starting off terribly, which is a problem, then coming back and making it interesting thanks to some solid play, and then giving it away at the end. And Oshae Brissett was a big part of that. He was really, really fantastic in these weekend games. And the big takeaway, and the reason I wanted to highlight Oshae Brissett's performance, is by hitting 3 of his 5 threes against the Sixers, and by hitting 5 of his 10 against the Nets, he got his 3-point percentage this season up to 35. And that's not good necessarily, but after he was really hot from 3 his first season with the Pacers, he seems like he will settle in as an average or better 3-point shooter, to me at least, in the NBA. And to see him get those to go late in the season and get that average up to a reliable point, that makes me think he can be a good shooter. And I've always thought he's a better shooter than the percentages say. But to see that percentage settle in at a more reflective spot, I think is good. And it shows that he can be a pretty reliable 3 and D4, even if he's not a starter long term. He had a good weekend showing what he can do, and getting to 35% was good. Isaiah Jackson, poor Isaiah Jackson. Goga Gibitadze did not play in either game this weekend. He's dealing with that foot injury. Jalen Smith had a groin injury. He didn't play in either game this weekend. Miles Turner obviously has been out. So Terry Taylor's the backup center, but he was also the backup 4 because there was a bunch of other injuries. So Isaiah Jackson had to play a ton against Andre Drummond and Joel Embiid and just Nick Claxton and just big, burly, huge dudes who were just going to plow him over all the time. And he held his own. He didn't foul like crazy. He did end up having 5 against the Nets, but he played 32 minutes, so for his pace, pretty good. Only 3 fouls against Embiid in over 30 minutes, so poor Isaiah Jackson had matchup hell for him and still produced a pretty good weekend, 16-7 in the first game against Philly, 7 points, 3 rebounds in that second game against the Nets. And the thing about Isaiah Jackson that I thought was interesting this weekend, beyond the stats and holding his own against much stronger players, he talked about this offseason, the key thing for him is working on his body. And I think that's key for him. We saw this weekend that if he's stronger, he can be much better next year, and he can help this team in a lot more meaningful way, especially when they have no one else who can fill that role. So good for him to know that working on his body is his next step, and a good performance from him 2 times in a row to close out the season after he was extremely foul prone all year. To keep that down a little bit against some big competitors was good. Gabe York finally getting his due and getting into the NBA after years of trying and having a 10-day fall through with Orlando this year. Debuts with the Pacers, gets the game ball against Philly after hitting his first shot. Crazy first shot to make in the NBA. Goes up for a right-handed layup. Defender cuts him off. Switches to his left hand. Throws it up and one. Insanely tough for his first bucket in the league. Ends up with 7 points and 2 assists against Philly. Gets in a little bit against Brooklyn, but not a ton. Ends up with 1 point, 2 assists, 2 steals that night. Do I think Gabe York has a future with the Pacers? Not really, and this game wouldn't have changed these games would not have changed my opinion too much anyway. He does look like a decent rim attacker. He's got good vision. You know, his offensive game clearly looked like a really athletic point guard type that has always been, one of the better G League players. But his defense wasn't good enough to really, make me think that, maybe he can stick in the future, something like that. Could he be a two-way guy for the Pacers next year? Maybe, but at his age where he's already 28, it seems like, as a depth point guard, he's not really going to be an option for the Pacers in the future. I didn't think he was bad or didn't meet expectations or anything. He was fine in his NBA debut, and great for him to debut. He had some really nice moments, really good story for the Pacers this weekend, but just didn't show enough to make me think that he needs to be a part of the Pacers' plans this offseason. Last guy I want to highlight, Dwayne Washington on his new deal, had a great weekend, 15 points against the Sixers, 6 of 10 shooting, hit half of his threes, was excellent against the Nets, 7 for 11 from the field, at 4 threes, 18 points. That was the third most on the Pacers in that game. Was awesome in transition, leaking out, couple dunks, huge threes, was a big part again of that Pacers comeback as they were able to tie it up with the Nets. So that's the big takeaways from this weekend to me on the player front and on the generic team front. Their defense still sucked, and that was a big theme for the Pacers all season long, giving up 130 several times to some teams that don't even necessarily have awesome offenses. That wasn't the case this weekend. They played two great teams this weekend, but not a successful season for the Pacers. Everybody knows that. They went 25-57. Now in the lottery, yeah, maybe that could change their fortunes very quickly, but just a really poor season from the Pacers in these two games really perfectly summed up their season. Some nice promising moments, some encouraging comebacks, some good play from some key players, but just not enough for the Pacers to feel like they put their stamp on the season or the game. So let's talk about this season. It's over now. 25-57. Mercifully, Pacers fans will be happy that this season is over. It was the worst season the Pacers have had since the mid 1980s. There are some of you who could be listening to this who are maybe 36, 35 years old and have never in your life seen the Pacers be this bad. The last time the Pacers lost this much, Reggie Miller was not yet in the NBA. This season was truly the season from hell for the Pacers, as my column that will come out will describe, and I want to talk about it a little bit. Before we do that, though, guys, I want to talk about the great folks over at Built Bar who are making the best tasting protein bars ever. So many Locked On Pacers listeners have tried them and told me that they love them, and you should be the next one. They're 100% covered in chocolate protein bars that are soft, easy to chew, and come in so many flavors that are awesome. My favorite is the peanut butter brownie, but there's a ton of good ones. The cookie dough is really popular. The mint brownie is really popular. The puff infused ones with marshmallow are really popular. What I like about them is the flavor kind of matches the texture. Like the sweeter ones are a little chewier, and some of the fruit-based ones are a little chewier, but there's some ones with some crunch. The puff ones are really smooth to eat. They're just delicious. A lot of protein bars I get in the store are just gross. But Built Bar basically tastes like candy bars, low calorie, high protein. Most of them, you can see all the macros on their website, have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Go try them yourself. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. That promo code again is LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Thank you for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Now to hear about all the teams in the playoffs and the play-in and local experts describing how those teams will match up against each other and how big those games will be. Let's talk about this Pacers season. Look, this Pacers season was unlike any other, and maybe unlike any other seen for a very long time. The last time the Pacers picked this high has been very well documented. 1989 was the last time they had a pick less than 10, was 1989. The last time they had a high pick was even before that, right? This is not what the Pacers do. And there's a chance that it doesn't happen again until 2050 if they continue on a similar run of excellence and making the playoffs. I've heard 25 out of 31 years like they did after they picked inside the top 10 in 1989. This Pacers season was truly special, and not in a good way. It was a hellish Pacers season. Everything went wrong that could have possibly gone wrong. That's how I've described it before, and the signs were there right away, right? If you recall, last September, there were 2 injury updates for the Pacers before camp even started. Edmund Sumner would miss the whole season. TJ Warren's going to be out longer than expected. From then on, it should have been more clear that things would continue to turn poorly for the Pacers. Karis LeVert's back injury. They get COVID at the worst time. The whole team basically does. Right? That was when their schedule was finally getting easy. They're only about 3 games under 500. It blows up in their face. They're 2 games under 500. TJ McConnell goes down. Malcolm Brogdon gets hurt. Sabonis misses a few games. Miles Turner gets hurt. Chris Duarte gets hurt. It just keeps going and going and going and going. And that is part one to me. When I look back at this Pacers season where everything went wrong and it was impossible for them to overcome the odds sometimes, and yet they still shot themselves in the foot with poor encore play a lot. When I look back at this Pacers season, there'll be 3 things that I will look at and say, that is why they sucked. That is why they had the worst season they've had in forever, and why they need to learn from those things. That is the key part of this season. If the Pacers trot out with similar strategies in future seasons, you can point back to this year and go, they learned nothing from this. 3 things for me. 1 is injuries. 1 is defense, and 1 is their suckiness in close games. And there's some luck elements I'll talk about too. Look, the injuries are what they are. They lost, I think, 4th or 5th most games due to injuries this season. Nearly 400 missed games from all the players on their roster due to injury this season. That is insurmountable. I don't really care about them not being good enough when I look at that stat. I'll get to them not being good enough, but like that is insurmountably bad. That said, I was writing my postmortem column about this Pacers team, and I looked back at my 2020-2021 postmortem column, and it was like reading the same thing. It was Sabonis saying, oh, if we were healthier, we'd be better this year. It was Nate Bjorkgren saying that. It was Kevin Pritchard saying that. They didn't learn anything from that. They figured it out this year. They traded away LeVert. That they got some more healthy guys. Buddy Hield played every game after being acquired. Jalen Smith only missed 3. Tyrese Halliburton played every one. They figured it out, but they made their own luck. Yes, they had bad injury luck, but they made that luck by acquiring injury-prone players. You can have some injury-prone players on the roster. You cannot build your team around several of them. And I think the Pacers learned that the hard way the last really 3 years, but really has reared its ugly head this year with guys like Sumner getting hurt right when the season starts, and TJ Warren's injury, and Malcolm Brogdon and Karis LeVert, and even Miles Turner now. I'd probably classify him as injury prone at this stage. All of them being hurt a lot this year is sort of just a culmination of the Pacers trying to get these undervalued injured guys. Like that's something they did. I viewed that as smart in the second round of drafts for years. They would pick a guy who was hurt and that made their draft stock fall and try to get the most out of them. Like that's a decent strategy for a small market team. Ikeani Bogu was that guy. Edmund Sumner was that guy. But when it spills into your full team building plans and you get to where the Pacers are now, it just doesn't work out. And that is a big factor in their season this year and something they need to learn from. They can take some swings at injury prone players. They have an award-winning training staff. I understand it's hard to think that way about the training staff given how the last couple seasons have been. But I get thinking, we've got a great training staff. Let's try to gamble on these injury prone guys. It didn't work. They have to go a little farther back the opposite direction in terms of picking up guys like that who have those injury prone things. That is number one thing for me. Not number one like ranking them. That is one thing for me that the Pacers did poorly this season and led to their poor record. Number two is the defense and really just the team in general. Look, I'm receptive to the injury argument being part of the reason they were bad. But with all five of Karis LeVert, Malcolm Brogdon, Justin Holiday, Domantas Sabonis, Miles Turner, who they're going to be their 5 stars this season. I'm ignoring Warren because he didn't play all season. When all 5 of those guys played in the game this year, right, who should have been the Pacers' 5 starters and their 5 best players when the season started, Pacers went 5-8. 5-8, losing record in 13 games. It's not a lot of games. That's a pretty small sample size. But they weren't good when they had the players that they wanted to have. Right? You throw Duarte in, it's 8-8. That's still only a 500 team. That's what I predicted they would go, and that still isn't good. That would not have been in the plan. That would have been 11th in the East at 500 this year. That is not a good season, right? So even with the injuries, when they had the guys that they wanted, they were not good. And that is mostly because of their defense. They changed their defense a little bit every game based on their opponent. And you should do that to an extent. I think the Pacers do that a little too much. That said, I don't know what they do and don't do. I'm not an expert on X's and O's or anything like that. That is somewhat thing they need to get better at. They have to get back to the old Pacers of defense. I don't know how they do that. Maybe it's a coaching change. Maybe, not a full coaching staff change. Maybe it's a coaching staff reassignment. Lloyd Pierce is no longer on the defense. I don't know what it is on the coaching side. I don't understand coaching well enough to know. But maybe it's personnel changes, right? They had a lot of bad defenders this year, and the guys that are supposed to be good defenders for them, Torrey Craig got traded, Miles Turner got hurt, Justin Holiday took a step back, Malcolm Brogdon missed over half the season. They had a lot of personnel issues, but their scheme clearly did not work. They could not stop any action, any play, anything. They were awful and not physical on defense this year. They have to get back to being the Pacers of old, at least being credible on that end. Even Nate Bjorkgren season, they were 14th in defense, right? That's credible. That got them to the play-in. That's not where they want to be, but that's credible. That's not an irrelevant team level of bad defense. They have to clean up the defense. They just have to. The third thing that I will remember for the Pacers this year, historically bad team in the clutch. Just unbelievable. 19 losses by 4 points or less. That is top 10 ever in the NBA, losing 19 times by 4 points or less. And they were within 423 times, which is over a quarter of their games. Now, that actually, a small part of me wants to view that as a positive. That means 23 times this season, outside of the games that they won or lost in general, 23 times this season, they played their opponent to essentially an even draw for 45 minutes or whatever got them close late in the game, right? That's good. That suggests that this team is as good as a lot of teams in the league. But if you can't win any of those games, that doesn't matter. And they have to find a way to get better closing games. Whether that's finding a closer. They used to have Oladipo and TJ Warren, and this was not a problem. They used to have good defense, and they could actually shut other teams down late in games. That used to not be a problem. This year, they had neither of those things. And they were a miserably, miserably bad team in the clutch. And those three things, the injuries, the defense, and the poor closing of games, will be how I define this Pacers season, maybe for the rest of my life. When people ask me, why are the Pacers so bad? When my coworkers ask me, what's causing them these issues? Those are the things I'll point to. Now, luck was certainly a factor, right? Their schedule was horribly hard at the beginning of the season. And I know that every team plays the same teams. But that is usually how players and coaches describe the schedule. We play 82 games, we play, blah, blah, blah. It was so hard that Kevin Pritchard and Rick Carlisle, even in their media day pressers, were like, our schedule is really hard to start the year, right? That's bad luck. That's tough. And they actually got out of it okay. They went 500 in November. They were only 2 or 3 games under 500 in early December. And then the other unlucky part of their season happened where right when things eased up, they had a Houston game right before Christmas, and their schedule was a little bit easier for about 2 weeks. That was when their COVID spike happened. And they were playing guys that anyone available, basically, they were playing in those games. They couldn't recover from it. And boom, their season changes. Now there's only a month till the deadline, and they're 10 games under 500. A lot of bad luck went into the Pacers this year. And some of bad luck seeps into those close games. And some of bad luck seeps into injuries. But you do kind of make your own luck. I believe that in the NBA too. And the Pacers had bad luck this year for a lot of reasons. And now they're 25-57. And they'll have to grow from everything they've learned this year. They have to find a way to be better on defense. They have to find fewer players with injury histories that are incredibly crippling to the extent that they had this year. They have to find a way to be better in close games. Whether that's a strategic change. What I don't know what it is. I've never that a lot of close games are luck, but when you go 4-19 in games decided by less than 4, that's not luck. There's something to that. They have to learn from all of these things if they want to be better next year. And a lot of them can be fixed with personnel changes. They'll get a good draft pick. They have a lot of money to spend in free agency or creative strategies they can use in free agency to be a better team. But they have to move on from what they tried these last 2 seasons, basically. That team did not work. Those strategies did not work. And those pieces did not fit together. It made sense to do all the things that they did, but it just didn't work. And sometimes that happens in team building. And people deserve, who make decisions, to have critical things said about them when things don't work. But if you learn from them and move on, you can make it a successful part of a team building and growing strategy. If you lurk on them or cause them to seep into your next build or cause them to seep into the next iteration of the Pacers, that's where the problems will be. And if the Pacers are this team next year or similar to this team next year, then there'll be a lot more problems than just one down year with a high draft pick as a result. And that is how I feel about the 2021-22 Indiana Pacers. It was truly the season from hell. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and they have to learn from it and grow from it if they want to improve as a franchise. And I think at the trade deadline, they started to do those things. They acquired the right players to fit the style that they want to play. They acquired more healthy players who play in every game, and they figured out that they need better defenders at the deadline moves and got rid of some dead weight on that end of the floor. So I think they can grow from the season and will, given the decision makers and leaders that they have in place. But a lot went wrong this year that the Pacers have to learn from if they want to be better next year. And that is how I'll remember the 2021-22 Pacers. And I'm curious how you will. Hit me up on Twitter at TEastNBA. But we're not done here today. We're not done here. The Pacers season is over, but the standings are still going, and the NBA season is still going in a way that impacts the Pacers via the play-in tournament this week. Let's talk about the standings, where the Pacers ended up, what they still care about in the play-in, where their draft picks are going to be. Before we do that, let's talk about the good folks over at BetOnline.net, your number one source for all your sports betting needs and sports info. Find the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of Major League Baseball season. Phillies, good start to the season over at BetOnline.net. They're your continued source for all of your sports wagering information. From live betting to playoffs to esports to baseball to basketball to golf when the Masters were going on and more. BetOnline.net, that's the website you want to head to today. Or use your mobile device to get on there and learn more about the trends and the action over at BetOnline.net. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Go check out Locked On NBA. Second, to hear about the latest and greatest news around the NBA, Jackson Gatlin hosts our Monday show. The Pacers season and their draft picks are not settled yet. Let's talk about everything Pacers draft and how the season shook out standings-wise and how it all matters to the Pacers. I recorded this late at night thinking that Thunder Clippers would matter for the Pacers, and it did. But when I started recording, the Thunder were down 35. They lost by 50. And what does that mean? That means the Pacers officially finished with the 5th worst record in the NBA, 25-57, 5th in the lotto odds. The Thunder got it done with their losing at the end of the season and finished with 24. Detroit at 23 wins, Orlando 22, and Houston at 20 are the 4 teams ahead of them. Pacers, though, by losing their final 10, stayed ahead of Portland, who also lost their final 10, to keep that 5th spot at 25 and 57. For your lotto explanations, there is no tie, so it is pretty simple. And there'll be a lot of talk about this as the season goes on. But the Pacers have the lotto odds of, they have a 10.5% chance at the first pick, 10.5% chance at the second pick, 10.6% at the third, 10.5% at the fourth, only a 2.2% chance at fifth. And I'll do a whole segment eventually on odds in the lottery. Almost 20%, 19.6% at 6, 26.7% at 7, 8.7% at 8, and 0.6% at 9. Their expected value is basically the 5th pick, but their most likely outcome is the 6th or 7th pick. It's all very confusing, but that is where the Pacers sit at. I would say to expect probably the 7th or 6th pick for the Pacers, just because of how odds work. But again, their expected value is higher than that. That is where they finished the season. The Thunder got it done this weekend with the losing. The Pistons got it done this weekend for the losing. So on May 17th, the lotto will be drawn. The Pacers have the 5th best odds of jumping up into the top 4 but also have a fairly large chance of falling backwards a little bit just because of how the new flattened lottery odds works. The Pacers finished fifth thanks to that OKC loss that I waited so long to do. So what else happened this weekend? I've been tracking the Rockets a lot here on this show because if they finish with the worst record, they would also finish with the 31st pick, and the Pacers own the Rockets' second-round pick as a result of the trade they made that sent Caris LeVert to Cleveland. And the Rockets also got it done this weekend, losing their final game to Atlanta, clinched that they would have the worst record in the league, and that pick is now 31. That is the best case scenario for that pick that was traded to the Pacers from the Rockets at 31. So let's just put the Pacers in their most likely draft spot of 7, given how the lottery is. The Pacers now have picked 7 and 31 thanks to the Rockets completely stumbling all over themselves this weekend. So the Pacers got another pick this season that never gets discussed because it's terrible. It's from the Suns. The Pacers got the Suns second rounder along with Jalen Smith in that Torrey Craig trade. And that pick is last. The last pick in the draft, the Suns finished with the best record in the NBA, meaning that pick will be last. But let me stop you in your tracks before you say, why are you talking about the 60th pick of the draft? Because it's not the 60th pick in the draft. It is the last pick in the draft. It's not the 60th. If you'll remember, there was some tampering that went on this summer, believe it or not. Every team tampers, but the two teams got caught and got punished. Teams have been punished for their tampering in recent seasons. One of those teams is the Miami Heat for the Kyle Lowry sign and trade. Another one of those teams is the Milwaukee Bucks for the Bogdan Bogdanovic sign and trade. Those two teams, Miami and Brooklyn, have to forfeit their second rounders. Yikes, as a result of those trades. The Bulls would have had to, but they don't have a second round pick this year. So eventually the Bulls will also have to do that. But those two teams are forfeiting the 53rd and 55th picks. So that Suns pick that the Pacers get is actually 58th. So it's a little bit better than the 60th pick, despite it still being the last pick in the draft. So that's a very wordy way to say, yes, the Pacers pick from the Suns is the worst, but it's not the actual worst that it usually is. The last pick the Pacers could get from is the Cavs. They got that lottery protected in the Caris LeVert trade. I've talked about that ad nauseum on the show. Where did that settle out this weekend? Well, the Pacers love the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks did not want to play the Nets in the first round, and they knew if they lost on Sunday, they could get down to 3, and they succeeded. The Bucks played the Cavs on Sunday. They sat everyone good in that game. The Cavs blew out the Bucks backups, and that got the Cavs one more win than the Atlanta Hawks and one more win than the Charlotte Hornets, which means the Cavs finished 8th in the Eastern Conference. Why do the Pacers care about that? Well, remember, the Pacers have the Cavs pick, but lottery protected, which means the Cavs have to make the playoffs through the play-in for the Pacers to get that pick. So because the Cavs beat the Bucks and got to that 44th win, they are now in the 7-8 game in the play-in, which means they have 2 lives. They play the Nets in the first game, and then if they lose that, they have another chance to win and make the postseason. So let's do the full postseason explainer and talk a little bit about odds and what this could mean for the Pacers pick and just general stuff that matters about this. So the Cavs will play Tuesday night in Brooklyn against the Nets. The winner of that game in the playoffs, done, 7 seed. If the Cavs win Tuesday night, it's over. The Pacers get their pick. It'll be either 17 or 18, I believe. And I will talk more about that exact pick slot in a moment. It will be, 16 or 17. And that is it. If the Cavs beat the Nets, that's over. They're in the playoffs and it's over. The Pacers do not have to worry anymore about that pick slot. If the Cavs lose on Tuesday to the Nets, they're not done. Their season is not over. Then they would go to a second play-in game. If you remember the Pacers last year, they won one play-in game and had to play in a second one because they were in the 9-10 game. So if the Cavs lose, they would then play the winner of that Hawks-Hornets game, the 9-10 game, and they would host that game in Cleveland. And that game, if they win that, they would then make the playoffs and the Pacers would get their draft pick. And if they lose that game, they would not make the playoffs and the Pacers would not get their draft pick. So the Cavs have to lose 2 times this week. That second game would be Friday if it happens. And they would have to lose to the Nets and then lose at home. So a couple of things to look out for and a couple math things. One, Jared Allen, Cavs all-star center, has missed quite a bit of time with a left hand injury. If he's able to return, the Cavs got Mobley back. They still have Garland. Jared Allen is an all-star. If he's able to return and they're close to full strength, I think they have a pretty good shot at making it through this. They'd have 2 all-stars and they'd have an absolute stud and Evan Mobley on their team. Kevin Love looks great this year. They just have a solid team. There's a reason they got 44 wins. I would put it at a good chance. So Jared Allen's return is something Pacers fans and the Pacers franchise, honestly, will be heavily tracking. If he is able to return, that would be huge for the Pacers. And if the Cavs do make the playoffs, the Pacers would get the 16th or 17th pick, and then we'd have to revise what the Pacers pick situation is. And let me just talk about the odds of this tournament. Even if you're really down on the Cavs right now, and for good reason, they've been under 500 since the trade deadline. They limped into this play-in tournament. They barely got into the 7-8 game. Let's say you're down on the Cavs. let's say you think there's a 30% chance the Cavs win any game. If they win their first game or their second game, there is still, with those odds, over a 50% chance in your head that the Cavs will make the playoffs, right? That would be a 70% chance to lose the first game and a 70% chance to lose the second game. That's still only a 49% chance to lose both. So if you think the Cavs have a 30% chance to win both games, that's still over 50% chance the Pacers would keep their pick. That's how important it was to have two lives. That a team with a 3-10 shot to win is still more than likely to make it than not. So that's just even beyond who's playing. Mathematically, the Cavs have a pretty good shot to make the playoffs because they have two lives. Last year, if you remember the first ever play-in tournament last year, the four teams that came out of it were the 7 seed and 8 seed in the East and the 7 seed and 9 seed in the West, right? So of the teams that play in that 7-8 game, 3 out of 4 last year made it in, right? So the odds are in the Cavs' favor and thus in the Pacers' favor, and it's worth monitoring all that. Now, let me talk to you about a second little tiny ripple effect from this thing. Look, the Pacers obviously want the Cavs to make the playoffs so that the Pacers get that pick, and then they would have two really good firsts and the best possible second rounder. But another consideration from the Pacers' perspective, they actually want the Nets to make the playoffs too, because the Cavs and Nets finished with the same record, which means a coin flip will determine who picks higher. So if the Cavs make the playoffs and the Nets don't, the Cavs pick is guaranteed to be 17. But if they both make it, the Cavs win the coin flip and that goes up to 16, the Pacers could actually get a better pick. And that's the only way the Pacers get 16 is if the Cavs and Nets both make the playoffs. If the Cavs make it and the Nets don't, it's 17 for sure. So what the Pacers actually want is the Cavs to beat the Nets and then the Nets to win, because then they get the most stress-free way of the play-in tournament shaking out their way. But what the Pacers also could be for is if the Cavs do lose to the Nets, then they still want the Cavs to win, and they could get that 16th pick out of this. So it's a weird way of describing it, but the Pacers are actually rooting for the Nets if the Cavs win that first game in that second game. So in short, Pacers have the 5th best lottery odds and have a pretty good shot at a top 7 pick this year. They have the 31st pick from the Rockets. They have the 58th pick from the Suns because of 2 forfeited second rounders. And they would really like the Cavs to come out of the play-in tournament. They would also like the Nets to come out of the play-in tournament. And that is the Pacers draft situation as the season ends. We'll, of course, be tracking all that here on Locked On Pacers as the Cavs play Tuesday and Friday. So lots of important stuff to break down from a Pacers perspective. I hope you all enjoyed this season and the coverage here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. We'll, of course, be coming at you daily for the next couple months still. There's still lots of player season recaps to do. There's draft previews to do. There's free agency previews to do. There's all sorts of fascinating stuff that you all love coming up very soon on the Locked On Pacers podcast. This week, I'll do a lot of postmortem stuff, right? We got exit interviews coming up tomorrow for you guys to hear about. I want to evaluate this Pacers season with various Pacers personalities. And then late this week and early next week, we'll get into that free agency, draft stuff, key dates, all that stuff you love to know and what to watch for after a 25-57 Pacers season. Thank you all so much for listening this season. I know I said it a lot, but it means the world to me that I even get to do this, not as a full-time job, but as a job that is fun and makes me a little bit of money. And I couldn't do that without you guys hanging out with me every day. And I genuinely love doing this, and I hope I get to do it for a very long time. So thank you all for listening. I hope you all enjoyed this season and listening to this show every day this season. And I hope I can make it better for you this offseason. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.